So this morning I'm going to show you how to make a macrame cuff to decorate your vases. So these cuffs are really handy. It's pretty much one size fits all. So if you've made it for a jam jar, if you had a tumbler, you could put it in there, or if you had some skinny vases that you wanted to update. It's one of these techniques, again, that you could use for jam jars, but equally you could use them on your regular vases just for adding a bit of an upcycling twist, really. So I don't know whether you've done any macrame before. I did some macrame when I was about 10 years old. I can remember making a wall hanging. I made an owl for my granny, and then I made one for my mum as well. So it's just reinventing the techniques that you may well have enjoyed when you were a child, but just giving them a bit more of an up-to-date finish and a bit more of a modern interpretation, really. Now what I am using is t-shirt yarn. I went on a macrame workshop at the beginning of the year with Charlotte Jacqueline, who is Betty from Betty magazine, and she was running a class, or she was hosting a class, and another lady, Heather, was teaching us how to do macrame. So I've done a little wall hanging at home with my daughter, and I actually went off and bought the checked out online for t-shirt yarn. So I'm going to be using this, number one, because I've got a whole ball of it, so I didn't have to go out and buy anything else. But number two, because it's quite chunky and soft, I know it's not going to take me forever to make a cuff for my jar. So it's quite unlikely that you've got this to hand at home, but you could use, if you're a knitter, chunky wool, or you could use string or garden twine. If you're using string or wool, probably it'll take you a bit longer to do because your knots will be much tighter and closer together. So whereas I'm going to run off an arm's length of the yarn to start making my little cuff, you'll probably have to take up to 2 meters, I would think, to go round your jar. I'm actually going to make one for a skinnier jam jar, and even if I only got through to, making a cuff and you went part way round, I could sort of have ties at the back like a little corset and doing it up. So you don't need to make a complete circle. You could just make a little motif in macrame at the front and then have it tied on at the back. So I don't know if you've never seen t-shirt yarn before. It is literally, it's the jersey fabric from t-shirts. So if you did have some old t-shirts, you could try cutting those up, and then as you cut it, it just naturally rolls in on itself, and it's got quite a bit stretch to it. And the other thing you need for this job is a pencil and some sellotape as well. So I'll show you what those are for in a moment. So what I'm going to do, I need to work with 8 pieces of, let's call it string, and I'm going to run off. So I'm pulling this from the middle of the yarn, which is always a good idea if you are using any sort of wool, rather than taking it from the outside edge because it all falls apart. So I'm going to run off a good arm's length. So that's going to be 1 length, and I'm going to do the same amount again. So that gives me 2 lengths of yarn, and I said 8, didn't I, altogether? So I need 4 pieces that are the same length. So having got that first one, I can then measure off for the rest. Like so, and measuring them, still coming out different lengths. It doesn't really matter. But what you will find, you're either going to run out of yarn, in which case you will just be making the sort of medallion motif to go on the front, or you'll find you've got lots left over. It's really quite hard. I guess if you were really scientific, you'd be able to work out how long the length should be, depending on the size of your knot. It's a bit like knitting, really, and the tension you're going to create. So I will take each piece of the yarn, and on the looped bit, and rather annoyingly, it's got a knot in there, so it's not a continuous length on my yarn. I've noticed they've joined several bits together, and that's just got a knot where I want to have a knot. I might just shuffle things down a bit, because I am going to tie a knot in there. So I'm going to create a loop and tie a knot, and if I'm clever, I should be able to get the knot in the same sort of place. I've got a real chunky knotty knot there, which then slides onto my pencil. And repeat. So that's 2 pieces which are 4 lengths, and again the same. Now on the table in front of me, right at the end of the video, I'll show you my jam jars to date. So I'm getting quite a collection now. And I've just been around the garden refreshing some of the dead bits. Well, I've pulled out the dead bits, tipped away the water, refreshed the water, and just done a bit of cutting from my garden. And they've all got a yellowy theme now, so I shall show you those later on. But it just goes to show that you don't need to have lots in your garden to make a little flower arrangement. Again, just tying a knot and slipping it on. So I've got pencil with my 8 strands, 2, 4, 6, 8, and it would look even neater if I'd done the same knots at the same height, but you can think about working on that when you've got more time. So my pencil, and the reason I put it on a pencil is I need to hold it steady so I'm not making everything in my hand. And what I will do, taking a bit of sellotape, and I'm going to tape the pencil down to my worktop so that I can pull a bit on the lengths. Now, when you come and do macrame, you need to work with 4 strings. I'm going to move those 4 just out of the way and come back on this side here. But this for me is my left-hand side, and I'm taking the left-hand side most of the string, and I am pulling it across like this, and it's making for me a number 4. So it goes over, you're doing all the knotting, and you've got these central strings coming down, and you've always got 2 strings in the middle. So you make your knot, and then you take your 4th bit of string, and that goes over, so you've got a number 4, and the cross piece of the 4 goes underneath the 4th string, and then you take that 4th string and it goes under the 2 middle ones, and it comes out through the hole at the top. So I'm hoping that is going to be clear enough for you to understand. So I will work through this, we'll do lots of knots, and then I come on to my second lot and do exactly the same thing. So I've got my 2 strings that go down the middle, and I put my finger on the string, on my left hand string, and I pull it across, and for me this is making a number 4, and I then flick the last one over the top, and taking that end string, it goes under the 2 in the middle and up through the gap where that number 4 had been created. So I've done one line, I've got one knot, well, I've got half a knot actually, and I'll explain more on each bit of string. And if you notice here, there is a vertical line going through, so I've got a horizontal line created with a knot here and a vertical line going down. And where you've got the vertical line, that is your indication that you need to do the knot in reverse. So you make this a backwards number 4, and you take the 4th bit of string over the top of that cross piece of the number 4 and up through the hole. And now you've got the vertical bit of the knot on the other side. So you repeat it here. Here's the vertical knot, and you make, for me, a backwards number 4. You take that string over the top, and it goes through the hole there. And it's also easier to do when your strings are a bit shorter, but you need the length to carry straight the way on. So that is one complete knot. It's got a vertical on one side and a vertical on the other. If you keep knotting on the same side, you'll find the knot twists, which is a knot in itself. But I'm going to keep everything flat here because the jam jar sides are flat. So I've got my 8 pieces of string. I'm then going to make a knot in the middle. So this time I'm going to discard 2 pieces that side and 2 pieces this side. And then I've got my 4 pieces in the middle. So the 2 lie centrally, that's where I'm making my knot around those. And then I'm going to make my number 4 again. So I anchor it down with my finger, slide that across so it makes a vague number 4. This one goes over that cross piece, under the 2 middle ones and up through the hole in the number 4. and you pull it. So you can see, because I'm using chunky yarn, by the time I've done 3 knots, I've created about 3 centimetres of cuff. And if you were to use string, you would probably have needed to make 8 or 10 knots. So it is quicker when you're using thicker yarn, whether that be chunky wool or this t-shirt yarn. And I'm pulling it, I'm just trying to sort of maintain the tension so it doesn't go squiffy. So what I've got, I'm making a pattern. I'm going to have 2 knots, 1 knot, 2 knots, 1 knot, 2 knots, 1 knot, until I've approximately got all the way around the jar. So now I'm going to go back to doing my knots on the outside edge, so I can get rid of those 4 strands for the moment. So I've got my 4 strands coming down, so the 2 here are the central, and then because my last knot, my last vertical was here, I know to start on the left hand side and go across those middle pieces, and then take the 4th piece that goes over the cross piece, under and up into the hole. So you just need to be careful here, because you're going to end up with a longer length of anchor piece on the side that you don't want to pull it too tight. So it needs to level up with this knot in the centre. So you're going to have a little bit of design here where you've got these longer pieces at the sides. And then I can see my vertical sections there. So you're just all the time doing a knot on one side and then the other. So creating my number 4, that piece of yarn goes over the top of the cross piece of the number 4, under the 2 pieces of central yarn, up through the hole. So I've done 2 knots there, and you can see that I'm ready with the vertical piece there, so I can move those out of the way, bring my next 4 down. So I'm starting on the left hand side, making that number 4 shape, bringing the 4th piece of yarn over the top of the cross piece, back under the middle and through the hole, and then I repeat it on the other side, just to get everything to lie flat. So here's my long piece here, my vertical bit of the knot. So I make the number 4 in reverse for me and do the same thing. So now I've got 2 knots here, 1 knot, 2 knots, so it's time to do the central knot again. So I shall get rid of those 2 pieces over there and these 2 pieces over here. And make my number 4. Flick that last one up so it goes over the cross piece and up through the gap there, and pull it gently. So I'm not over pulling it, everything needs to be the same sort of tension. And then I'm making my reverse number 4 to come back, and that piece of yarn goes over the top of that cross piece and back like that. And get these pieces to lie straight. So 2 knots, 1 knot, 2 knots, 1 knot, everything back to the beginning again. Put those 4 to one side for later. So making my number 4, this piece of yarn goes over the top of the cross piece and up into that gap. So this is when I'm getting the quite long gappy piece here. I'm going to do for what for me is a reverse number 4. Take that first piece of yarn over this cross piece here. Just checking that you can see all right, because I can't see what I'm doing now on the camera. So that's my next knot, that can all be moved out of the way. Bring the next 4 down. So those 2 stay in the middle, creating what is the number 4 for me. That 4th piece of yarn goes over the top of that cross piece and back in the hole. So I'm always getting this longer piece at the side because it's skipping a row. And then create my, for me, is my backwards 4. And then my last piece goes over the cross rail under the two middle pieces and back, and I have created my next knot. So here you've got 2 knots, 1 knot, 2 knots, 1, 2. So I think I'm going to finish off on this row. So there's my next 4 coming down here, because otherwise we will be here all day. And it doesn't help as well that my yarn is sliding around a bit more. Of course you won't be making yours and filming at the same time, so hopefully you'll find it a little bit easier. So I'm going to leave it there for the moment. So I've got this cuff that's between finger and fourth thumb. So what's that? Is that 6 inches? 15 centimetres, and it's about 5 centimetres wide or so. So if I peel the pencil off my table, you can see how that would make quite a pretty wall hanging. If you had more than, you just need to bear in mind, if you want to adapt this, is that each knot takes 4 pieces of string, so you could go up in multiples of 4. In fact, the bit of macrame I made at the workshop I went to in January, it's about this wide and it tapers off at the end. So there we have, I think that's quite nice. I mean, if you were a knitter, you could knit something for your jar. So you'd wrap it around your jar. Well, actually, that's a pretty good fit in terms of size. Now the next thing I need to do is to fix everything securely. So what I'm going to do is, I've got my first knot here. I'm going to slide the first one off the pencil, and then with one of my pieces of yarn thread through. So I guess this is my version of casting off as if you were knitting. So I'm sliding it off the pencil, taking one of the pieces of the set of 2 through the hole, slide it off the pencil, and then one of the pairs through the loop, off the pencil, one of the pairs through the loop. So here I've got each of the knots, and it's just got one of the loops behind, and I've got a spare piece of string here, and perhaps it's easier to show you that way around. So I'm just trying to, nothing's going to come undone, but it's just keeping extra secure. And this is where it's quite good in terms of adjusting, because my jar is quite skinny. If you had a fatter jar, it would still fit on. You know, this jar's a bit bigger, and I could, in theory, slide it onto this jar here. And you know, you don't need to pull to adjust until you're ready. So that's how far I've got at the moment. And then, string by string, I pull them tight, to close up that gap a little bit. And I'm going to tie that in a double knot. So that's the first one in place, and then the second one, that's the string that's gone through the loop. That's the string left over from the actual macrame, and pull that. So this has got a definite front and a back. I'm just trying to be as neat as I can at the back, so that if the jar is turned around, it doesn't look obvious. I'm trying to just make sure my workmanship is really neat. So travelling up there, I'm trying to get these knots I'm tying to be level, but I'm not over fussing with it. If you were particularly particular, you could take more time in making sure your knots were coming up in the same place. And the same thing here, last one, that's where the loop tie went through the little loop there, and I will tie a double knot. Like so. So all those tied off there. Now if you know, maybe if you like the tassels, you could keep the tassels on there. You could thread beads onto them if you wanted to. But I want this to look as discreet as possible. I want the concentration to be on the front of the cuff here. So I'm going to cut mine off. I'm just going to tighten them and then cut them away. So once these are cut, there's no adjusting to be. If you are cutting them short, you can't undo the knot easily. So I would make sure you are happy with what you're doing. So I'm cutting the ties right down. And you can see there what I meant about there being lots of bits left over. So you're either going to end up with lots of spare bits, or you're going to find that you didn't cut enough to begin with. And there you have it. So that's the back with the 4 knots tied off, which does look reasonably neat. Necessarily think you'd know that was the back. And then as you go round, you can see the knot work there. So I'm quite pleased with that, really. And you could imagine that because they do slide on and off quite easily, she says, as she struggles to put it back on again, that if you had, a vase indoors and you just wanted to give it a bit of a lift, that you could create a cuff for it. If you had a really tall vase, you could have cuffs going right way at the top, on either one really tall cuff or do it in different colours. So this morning I have just revamped my arrangements I did last week. So this was the little decoupage jam jar, and actually the dahlia is new in there, and I picked it because it had some petals missing in the garden. And I thought if I nestled that down amongst my flowers and hid it a little bit, it wouldn't look as if the petals were missing, it would just be nestled in. And the only thing I've changed in here is the little bit of fennel in there. So the materials, this has been to my sister's house and back, and it's held up really well. So when I've been travelling with them, I've just put the tiniest amount of water in just to keep them fresh. But because of the nature of the materials, the rose hips here, the sedum, the rosemary and the little globe thistle that has never flowered, I think probably it's drying in situ there, but they're quite robust materials. They have lasted really well. So I've just added a tiny bit of colour because of one of those offcuts from the garden. And then the tied arrangement, remember again I made this at my sister's house, and I had a hydrangea in there and some of her fuchsia hanging over the edge. And what I've got here is, again, we've got loads of fennel in our garden, so a sprig of fennel which is just nestling in. It's almost like a sort of castle, the crenellated edges, and it's nestling in there. And then actually this here, a very short stem, I've got loads of water in my jam jar, is from a begonia plant, a bedding plant in the garden. So I don't really like it very much actually, but I thought with the yellow of the fennel, it just picked up really nicely. And then we've got some miniature hollyhocks, and I thought just one of those. So you don't need that many flowers to create a display. And here it's the sticks around the edge of the jam jar that are, your eye is being drawn to. And it's just got in there, I've got a couple of lichen branches, some of the lavender that I picked from I bought from the lavender farm last week, and then a piece of fennel, a couple of stems of the begonia, and one flower head from my hollyhock. And it changes the whole look of that. So I'm really quite pleased with that. I'll keep going for a little while longer. And then this is the arrangement I made when I was away visiting my mum and dad. And I didn't get to pick any flowers from my dad's garden because we were really busy. So this morning I've got the seed head of the fennel. So it's flowered, and it's just you've got the shape of the seed heads there. And I noticed we had a couple of weeds growing in the lawn, so I've picked those off at the side there too. They're not dandelions, but they look like little dandelion things there. So again, I'm going with a bit of a yellowy theme, and when you see the three together, it's sort of uniting them all because there's that one lot of yellowness going on. So for today's arrangement, I'm going to put one big flower in. So again, the talking point on this little vase is the cuff arrangement. You could put lots of flowers in, or you could just go for one big flower. So I've gone to extremes here. My husband's advice is when I cut my flowers from the garden, he doesn't want to see where I've been cutting them, and also that I have to cut as if I'm a gardener. So hence I've got this sedum on a really long stem, and all I really wanted was the top bit. So I shall cut that and then the rest of that could go into the compost heap. But what you might want to do, if you have got really long stems and you want the flower head, you can go back into the rest of the stem. And if you're really clever with my cutting, if you notice when I cut, I was going right down into the flower head, the stem head, and I've cut diagonally, sort of a continual line, so it's sort of flush with that leaf, so it doesn't look obvious where I've cut. And if I wanted to put these stems into a jar, they just look like 3 pieces of greenery. And as we did before, I do like my flowers to be nestled up above. In later weeks we will do an arrangement that's a bit bigger for your jar, but I do like these sort of nestled down ones. So I've got it approximately the right height. I need to take off the stems, make it a tiny bit shorter, like that. I mustn't forget to put water in. So you could just have one big flower put in, like so. And I've also got some hydrangea as well. So this is part of the much bigger floret. So the whole hydrangea head is about this big, so I've probably taken about 1/4 of it. And what's quite useful about these kind of plants, they look a bit like broccoli in the sense that they're really branched. So you could put them into your vase as just as one flower, or you could use this as a natural frog and arrange flowers through it. Now, my hydrangea isn't the best. It's no doubt it's the hot weather. It's got some of the leaves have gone a little bit brown and curled around the edges. So you could go through and just pinch out the little bits. But also, as well, I've had this sitting in water. Hydrangeas like to drink from their heads as well. So with my little jug of water, I'll just give it a slop around and a bit of a shake. And it's sort of the world's easiest bit of flower arranging, that you could just say, well, that's my arrangement. I got my hydrangea resting on the side. In fact, it's a bit wobbly. It's not fitting down far enough inside my vase. That's a bit better. The balance is a bit better there. So you just have a really simple arrangement. Or if you wanted to put the 2 pieces in, again, this is branched as well. So you can put it down into your container and then weave the bits of sedum in a bit, so it doesn't just look like 2 blobs of flower. You can get them to move around, and I will show you this when I've finished fiddling. So you can see they're sort of interspersed together. So I haven't put loads of different stems in. It's just 2 stems, and then I've sort of knitted them together, relying on the natural branching of the stems, and that would be what would hold my flowers in place. So it's just a little haze of colour over the top there. And if you did want to add more flowers, I'm desperately searching around for my compost bin. And I've got some bits of old lavender in here and a bit of old conifer. If you wanted to, I'm not going to, so I'm going to whip these out as soon as I've shown you. But you could get your other stems, just for ease. Actually, these have still got lots of lovely scent. You could then, using the natural frog that you've created, you can slide through your other flowers. I'm going to hold that up again in a minute so you can see what I'm doing, because they will, I just need to make sure they're in the water. The natural branching stems of both the sedum and the hydrangea will hold those in place. I don't like that very much because I just feel it's sticking up too much, but just for demonstration purposes. And then bits of conifer here as well, so I can cut lots of side shoots off the conifer and then take off the bits of green which will go into the vase. So it's always this clean stem we put into the vase, and you could do the same thing, thread those through. But I quite like the simplicity, but it's just to show you that you could use a branched flower as a natural frog to hold up your other flowers in place. So I'm going to whip these bits out because I don't like those very much. I quite like the simplicity of the knots, and then the 2 halves, my sedum and my hydrangea, they're sort of melding in together with 2 stems, which looks like I've made an arrangement with lots and lots of flower heads.